There are moments in WWE history that feel less like a match and more like a cosmic shift, moments so utterly shocking they rewrite the very fabric of the company's universe. Rhea Ripley, the Eradicator, we thought we knew her path. The Mami, the dominant champion, the cold-hearted leader. But what if I told you that one night, one single, unbelievable night, Rhea Ripley stepped across a line no one saw coming, a betrayal so deep, a decision so personal, it left every single person in the locker room, from Vince McMahon to her closest ally, absolutely speechless. This isn't the story of a title defense. This is the secret backstage truth behind the moment the wrestling world held its breath. To understand the magnitude of the fallout, you must first understand the architecture of her dominance. Rhea Ripley was not just a champion, she was a system. She was the linchpin of the Judgment Day, a faction built on calculated chaos, but ultimately, controlled by her iron will. Finn Bálor, Damian Priest, Dominik Mysterio, they were extensions of her power. Her shadow collective. The whispers backstage were not about if she would lose the title, but when she would choose to relinquish it. So complete was her control. She had defeated every challenger, absorbed every surprise attack, and converted every narrative weakness into a display of Mami's unwavering strength. Her relationship with Dominik, a bizarre yet effective dynamic, was the emotional center of her character. It was the human element that grounded her otherworldly aggression. This connection, however strange, was seen by the veterans as Rhea's only potential vulnerability. A chink in the impenetrable armor of the Eradicator. The backstage vibe around her was one of awe, mixed with dread. She wasn't untouchable physically, but she was untouchable politically within the storyline. The writers saw her as their ultimate weapon, a performer who could make any angle resonate, any feud feel immediately high. She had earned that trust through grueling work and undeniable star power. The creative planning for her future stretched months, even years, into the distance main eventing WrestleMania, crossing over into the mainstream, becoming the generational talent she was always destined to be. Her position felt less like a wrestling slot and more like an established, unshakable landmark. But stability in WWE is a myth. It is a carefully constructed facade, perpetually awaiting the next earthquake. And this earthquake was not scheduled. It was not planned in a writer's room. It originated, sources suggest, from a deep, fundamental shift in Rhea Ripley's own perspective. A growing internal conflict that began subtly, almost invisibly, months before the event that shook the world. It started with small, uncharacteristic acts of hesitation, a momentary pause before delivering a riptide, a fleeting look of confusion when she witnessed Dominik taking a particularly vicious beating. These micro-betrayals of her own character were overlooked, dismissed as creative nuance. The truth is, even the most dominant figures crave a sense of control over their legacy. And according to sources close to the situation, Rhea Ripley began to feel that her carefully curated character was starting to own her, rather than the other way around. The line between the Eradicator and the human being, Demi Bennett, was beginning to blur, and the pressure was immense. She had built a kingdom, but the crown was crushing her. This internal struggle was the silent ticking clock counting down to the moment when she would make a choice that would not just defy the script, but shatter it completely. A choice that would leave the entire WWE universe questioning everything they thought they knew about Mami. This escalating tension, this profound sense of internal discord, was the powder keg. All it needed was a single spark, and that spark was lit on a Tuesday night in front of a capacity crowd. The setting was a routine Monday Night Raw main event, or so everyone thought. A six-person tag match designed to elevate a mid-card rivalry while keeping the Judgment Day visibly dominant. Rhea, Priest, and Bálor were pitted against three fan favorites, a returning legend, a rising star, and a resilient veteran. The match was a typical, well-choreographed WWE spectacle, full of near falls, dramatic dives, and the signature opportunistic interference of Dominik Mysterio. The plan was clear, a decisive victory for the Judgment Day, sealing their status as the most dominant force on Raw. The finish was scripted to be a crushing coup de grace from Finn Bálor, followed by a riptide from Rhea for the final 3 count. Clean, efficient, expected. But as the match entered its chaotic climax, the first true sign of instability emerged. The returning legend, a figure known for their integrity and respected by the entire locker room, managed to isolate Dominik Mysterio. The crowd erupted. Dominik, as is his character, panicked. He scrambled toward the corner, desperately reaching for the safety of his faction members. Damian Priest and Finn Bálor were tied up on the outside, brawling with the other competitors, leaving Mami as his only salvation. He reached out to Rhea, his face a mask of genuine fear. This was the moment for the cold, calculated savior to step in, to deliver the necessary distraction or cheap shot. This was the moment the script demanded the Eradicator protect her protege. But she didn't move. She stood on the apron, her eyes not on the match, not on the referee, but fixed solely on Dominik. There was no anger, no panic, only an unnerving, blank stare. The commentary team, seasoned professionals, missed it completely, too focused on the action in the ring. But the camera operator on the hardcam, privy to the backstage script, immediately knew something was wrong. The planned sequence was collapsing in real time. The legend hit a devastating finishing maneuver on Dominik. 1-2. The bell shouldn't have rung. The script dictated a breakup. Yet, the 3 count was completed. The Judgment Day had lost. Dominik Mysterio was pinned. The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd's reaction was delayed. A confused mix of cheering for the unexpected winners and stunned realization that something had gone fundamentally sideways. Inside the ring, the victorious team celebrated hesitantly, their eyes drifting toward the furious expressions on Bálor and Priest's faces. And on the apron, still unmoved, was Rhea Ripley. She slowly stepped into the ring, not to confront the victors, but to stand over the defeated, groaning Dominik. This was the pivot point. This was where the entire, carefully constructed story began to unravel. The shock wasn't the loss. It was Rhea's inaction. And what came next was something no one, not even the most seasoned bookers, could have possibly anticipated. The secret backstage fury had finally manifested itself in the brightest spotlight. The immediate aftermath backstage was pure, unadulterated chaos. Vince McMahon, notorious for his reactions to unplanned segments, was reportedly incandescent. The writer's room was a flurry of shouted corrections and desperate phone calls. On the surface, the story would be that Rhea simply failed to make the save. A miscommunication, a rare, costly mistake. But everyone who witnessed the look in her eyes knew that was a lie. This was not a mistake. It was a deliberate choice. A message sent without a single word, a betrayal executed with chilling, surgical precision. As Bálor and Priest slid into the ring, their faces contorted with a mixture of confusion and white-hot anger, the air became thick with unspoken tension. They demanded an explanation, not as faction members, but as men whose entire storyline credibility had just been jeopardized. Damian Priest, usually the most outwardly volatile, held his hands up, trying to keep a lid on the situation. Finn Bálor, the silent killer, was the one who stepped forward, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was picked up by a nearby hot microphone. Rhea, what in the hell was that? Rhea Ripley didn't flinch. She didn't offer an excuse. She didn't yell. She looked at Bálor, then at Priest, and finally, her gaze settled back on the vulnerable figure of Dominik Mysterio struggling to sit up on the mat. The silence stretched, becoming an agonizing cinematic masterpiece. The music stopped completely. The crowd noise was reduced to an anxious murmur. And then, Rhea did the unthinkable. She delivered a silent explosion that echoed louder than any pyro. She knelt down beside Dominik. She reached out her hand, and the assumption was that she was going to help him up, to offer a word of comfort, or perhaps a sharp admonishment. That would have been Mami. That would have been expected. Instead, she gently stroked his hair, a gesture of almost heartbreaking tenderness. Dominik looked up at her, relief flooding his eyes, believing, in that desperate instant, that the bond was still intact, that all was forgiven. And then, in a flash of cold, heartless fury, she slapped him across the face, hard. The sound was sickeningly loud. Dominik recoiled, holding his cheek, his eyes wide with utter incomprehension. It wasn't a wrestling move, it was a vicious, deeply personal act of severance. Bálor and Priest froze. The broadcast cameras, momentarily confused, scrambled to find a close-up. They captured the moment perfectly. Rhea Ripley, looking down at the wreckage of her protege, with an expression that was terrifyingly empty. She wasn't the Eradicator. She was a stranger. She stood up, ignoring the stunned reactions of her faction mates, and simply walked away, leaving the entire arena, the commentary team, and the frantic officials backstage in a state of absolute, profound shock. It was the most perfect, cold-blooded betrayal in recent memory, precisely because it was so emotionless. The story had fundamentally changed. And backstage, the real drama was just beginning to unfold. The backstage area following that segment was less a functioning workplace and more a crime scene. People spoke in hushed tones, checking their phones, trying to verify what they had just seen. The immediate consensus among the talent was that this was a monumental, career-defining moment. But beneath the professional excitement, there was a palpable sense of unease. The unscripted nature of the ending, and the sheer brutality of Rhea's silent action, suggested a depth of emotional commitment that scared people. It was too real. The secret story, the one that the cameras didn't capture, involves the reaction of her now former faction. Finn Bálor and Damian Priest immediately went to the gorilla position, the area where performers enter and exit demanding answers from the head of creative. The creative team, still reeling from the unexpected deviation, had nothing to give them. They were told to simply react naturally on camera next week. But that wasn't good enough for Priest. He saw the loss, the embarrassment, and the slap as a fundamental disrespect to the entire group's narrative. The foundation was gone. Meanwhile, Rhea Ripley walked straight past the commotion, past the head writer trying desperately to flag her down, and into the women's locker room. The reaction in that space was even more complex. The women's division operates with its own distinct politics, a blend of respect, rivalry, and intense professional scrutiny. When Rhea entered, the room went dead quiet. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. It wasn't just fear. It was a calculated professional distance. Sources confirmed that a particular veteran, someone who had faced Rhea many times, approached her. This veteran, known for her no-nonsense attitude, simply asked, "Was that worth it?" The question wasn't about the storyline. It was about the sacrifice of a guaranteed, dominant run for a moment of volatile, unpredictable chaos. Rhea's reply was a single, chilling sentence, delivered without raising her voice. "I didn't quit the Judgment Day. I fired them." That statement spread like wildfire. It wasn't about a face turn or a heel turn. It was a declaration of complete, total independence. She wasn't just leaving a faction. She was dismantling her entire persona and rebuilding it from the ground up, on her own terms. It spoke to the depth of her frustration and the magnitude of her ambition. She was done playing a part written by others, even if that part was a champion. This backstage tension, the cold shoulder from the veterans, the fury of the men's division, the panic of the creative team all pointed to one singular, explosive conclusion. Rhea Ripley had intentionally burned down her own kingdom just to see what she could build in the ashes. The WWE now had a free agent in her prime, unburdened by factional ties, and utterly unpredictable. The next week's Raw was already being billed internally as the most must-see episode in years. The world was waiting for the Eradicator's explanation. The following week, the atmosphere in the arena was electric. Everyone, from the fans in the cheap seats to the security guards, was waiting for the Eradicator to speak. The company had wisely given her the entire first segment of Raw, rare and significant honor, reserved only for moments of genuine seismic shift. The lights dimmed, the ominous opening bars of her theme music hit, and Rhea Ripley walked out, title belt slung over her shoulder, looking more isolated and powerful than ever before. She didn't march. She glided, exuding an unnerving calm. She stood in the center of the ring, a single spotlight illuminating her. The silence from the crowd absolute. She didn't need to shout to command attention. She simply held the microphone, waited another agonizing 30 seconds, and then, she delivered the unsolicited truth. Her voice, usually a menacing snarl, was low, controlled, and intensely personal. "Everyone wants to know why," she began, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the audience. They want the juicy backstage dirt. They want the creative explanation. Was it a planned double-cross? Was I jealous of a tag team title run? Was I finally sick of ... Dom? She paused, allowing the crowd to react to the name. No, it was simpler than that. It was about fear. The statement was a profound shock, the Eradicator admitting fear. It made no sense. She continued, explaining her deep, secret story, the one that had been eating at her for months. "I looked at you, Finn. I looked at you, Priest. I looked at you, Dominik. And I saw something I was starting to despise. I saw complacency. I saw 3 men who were comfortable. 3 men who were happy to be second best, happy to use Mami as their shield, their heat magnet, their guaranteed pass to the main event. And I realized that by protecting you, by carrying you, I was becoming comfortable too." She drove the point home with clinical precision. The title means nothing if the road to the title is easy. The victory means nothing if the team does all the work. I didn't slap Dominik because I hated him. I slapped him because I was sick of carrying the dead weight. I was tired of being the Judgment Day's crutch. Her eyes hardened. I didn't leave because I was weak. I left because I saw my own dominance being watered down by your mediocrity. I didn't need 3 sidekicks. I needed a mirror. And what I saw in the reflection was a champion who had become too soft, too predictable, and too ... safe. The crowd was split, some booing the viciousness, others cheering the raw, unfiltered truth of her ambition. This wasn't a scripted promo. It was a wrestler declaring a war on the status quo, even if the status quo was her own success. She declared that she was giving up the Women's World Championship, a move no one saw coming to reset her path. She didn't want the title if the foundation was shaky. She wanted to earn it back, alone, starting from the bottom, if that's what it took to prove she was truly the best. The relinquishment of the title was the final, devastating act of herself. The relinquishing of the Women's World Championship was the final, devastating mic drop. It was a move unprecedented for a champion in her prime, demonstrating a commitment to her new, solitary persona that transcended simple gold. It cemented the secret backstage story. Rhea Ripley wasn't working for the WWE. She was now working against the complacency she felt had infected the entire system, starting with herself. The title wasn't her goal. The eradication of the expected was. The fallout was immediate. The next segment saw a distraught, furious Judgment Day, Bálor, Priest, and a broken-down Dominik confronting her. They didn't come to beg. They came for revenge. They demanded to know why she didn't just walk away, why she had to destroy them publicly. Rhea stood her ground, her face unreadable. She simply said, "You needed to be shocked. And now, you're finally interesting again." With those words, she had effectively transformed her former allies into her fiercest rivals. giving them the emotional fuel to elevate their own characters. She had made herself the ultimate antagonist, not through cheating, but through cold, hard honesty and the willingness to sacrifice her own position. The secret backstage story ends not with a whimper, but with a new beginning. Rhea Ripley's decision to walk away from the Judgment Day and surrender the title was not a sign of weakness, but the ultimate power play. By removing herself from the established narrative, she created a vacuum of unpredictability that the WWE and its fans craved. She forced everyone to react to her. She forced the writers to scramble, the talent to step up, and the audience to pay attention like never before. She became the biggest free agent within the company, without ever having to leave it. Her final statement, delivered backstage to a single producer, became the defining quote of the saga. Mami is dead. The Eradicator is here to stay. It was a declaration of war on her own past. A promise of a harder, colder, and more ruthlessly ambitious future. The next chapter will be defined by the enemies she created and the new ones she will find on her solitary climb back to the top. The image of the lone champion, standing amidst the rubble of her own creation, is the last image of this monumental story. This deep dive into the secret, shocking story behind Rhea Ripley's biggest betrayal reveals that the most dramatic moments in wrestling are rarely about the script. They are about the human element, the ambition, the fear, and the profound desperate need to control one's own legacy. Rhea Ripley didn't just leave everyone speechless. She proved that the most dangerous force in WWE is a champion with nothing left to lose. And we, the Ring Legends audience, are the privileged witnesses to this new era of fear. What did you think of Rhea's reasons? Drop a comment below with hashtag #MAMIIsDead and tell me if she made the right move. If you want more shocking WWE truths and deep dive cinematic stories like this, hit that subscribe button right now. Thank you for watching Ring Legends. We'll see you next time.